Welcome back. Before we begin, show a little love by liking this video and subscribing. This channel is full of heartbreak, hard lessons, and comeback moments that remind us the truth may take its time, but it always arrives. Let's get into it. Shalom cheated on Joe with a man from Dallas, then stood in their apartment in Southwest Houston and told him it was his fault she had to do it. She said he had become too soft, too tired, too predictable, like loyalty was a flaw and not a vow. She said if he had been more of a man, she would not have needed anybody else. Then she took off her wedding ring, set it on the kitchen counter next to the air fryer he bought her for Christmas, and walked out like she was the one who had been wronged. Here's how it happened. Joe and Shalom had the kind of beginning that made older folks smile and say, "That's the one." They met at a food truck park in Houston when Joe cracked a joke about paying $14 for shrimp tacos small enough to fit in a toddler's lunchbox. Shalom laughed so hard sweet tea came out her nose, and Joe, trying to be smooth, handed her napkins like he was a gentleman in a low-budget romance movie. She was warm, quick with her words, pretty in a way that made rooms shift when she entered. He was steady, funny, patient, the kind of man people trusted with spare keys and hard truths. Their first year felt stitched together by small, shining things. They took late drives through Third Ward with old R&B playing low, arguing over whether New Edition had more classics than Boyz II Men. They got caught in summer rain near Herman Park and ran laughing to the car, soaked through, Shalom's lashes sticking together while Joe fumbled the keys and blamed humidity's sabotage. He cooked for her on Sundays even though his pancakes always came out shaped like the state of Florida. She teased him without mercy, called them geography breakfast, and kissed him between jokes. Back then, love felt easy, like breath and music and home. When they married, Joe believed he was stepping into the life he had prayed for. Nothing flashy, just peace. A little apartment first, then a townhouse. Shared grocery lists. Matching towels Shalom insisted nobody was allowed to actually use. Arguments about thermostat settings. Quiet nights on the couch with takeout containers and true crime shows neither one of them could stop watching. Shalom said she loved that Joe was dependable, that with him she never felt like life might tip over. Joe wore that like a medal. He did not know some people love stability most when they can lean on it, not when they are expected to honor it. Joe worked long hours managing operations for a logistics company near the ship channel. It was not glamorous work, but it was clean, honest, and it paid enough to keep their life moving. When Shalom said she wanted to cut back at her job and figure out her next chapter, Joe supported it without hesitation. He told her a marriage had seasons, and maybe this was her season to breathe. So he covered more bills, skipped weekends out, and started picking up extra responsibilities without complaint. He thought sacrifice was what love looked like when the music faded and the real building began. He never made her feel guilty for needing him. At first, the changes were little things a loyal person talks himself out of noticing. Shalom started guarding her phone like it contained state secrets and nuclear launch codes. She laughed at texts and turned the screen away. She began saying, "I'm just tired," with a tone that ended every conversation. She came home later, smelling expensive and distant, sometimes with stories that had too many details in the wrong places. Joe asked simple questions, and she answered like he had accused her in court. He hated feeling suspicious. It made him feel cheap. So he swallowed his instincts and told himself marriage meant trust, not constant investigation. The deeper pain came from the way her family slowly joined the theater. Shalom's sister, Monique, used to hug Joe and load his plate at cookouts, calling him the only decent man we got around here. Then her smile changed. It stayed on her mouth but left her eyes. Her mother stopped asking Joe how work was and started making sly comments about men who think paying bills is enough. Even a couple mutual friends went strange around him, speaking carefully, looking away too fast. Joe could feel the room bend when he entered. He just did not know yet that everybody had received a script but him. One Friday night, Shalom told Joe she was driving to Dallas with her girlfriends for a quick birthday weekend. She packed light, but wore the perfume she usually saved for anniversaries and expensive restaurants. Joe offered to take her to breakfast before she left, and she acted irritated by the suggestion, like kindness had become a burden. He still kissed her forehead at the door and told her to be safe. After she drove away, he stood there a second too long with a strange feeling in his chest, the kind that doesn't sound like panic yet but definitely is not peace. By Sunday afternoon, that feeling had teeth. Joe found out in a way that would have been funny if it had not ruined his life. He was at home trying to assemble a bookshelf with instructions clearly translated by somebody who had once heard English through a wall. He had one shelf backward, 2 screws missing, and a headache building, when his cousin Reggie texted him a photo. In the background of a nightclub in Deep Ellum, half hidden behind a woman dancing with a purse bigger than her dress, was Shalom wrapped around another man like Joe had never existed. Reggie wrote, "Ain't this your wife?" Joe stayed so long the screen dimmed. He called her once and got voicemail. Twice and got voicemail. The third time she answered, annoyed, breathless, asking why he was blowing up her phone. Joe did not yell. He asked where she was. She said with the girls. He asked whether that was the truth she wanted to keep. Silence sat on the line for 2 seconds, heavy and ugly. Then she hung up. Joe did not sleep that night. He sat on the edge of their bed, staring at the comforter they bought together, feeling like his whole marriage had become a prank everybody else understood. By morning his chest felt caved in, like grief had hands. When Shalom came home, she did not come in ashamed or shaky. She came in offended. She dropped her bag, folded her arms, and acted like she was the one owed tenderness. Joe showed her the photo. For a second he saw it, the truth flashing across her face before arrogance covered it. Then came the cruelty. She said Joe had pushed her away with his routine, his caution, his boring little life. She said he had become more roommate than husband. She said a woman should still feel wanted, pursued, chosen. Joe heard every word, but the part that stayed with him forever was this: "You made this easy." Joe expected pain. He did not expect the coordinated abandonment. When he told a close friend from church, the man sighed and said women cheat for emotional reasons, like betrayal could be filed under understandable reactions. When Joe tried to speak to Shalom's mother, she accused him of neglecting her daughter's spirit. Monique called him controlling because he had asked questions. Even his own cousin, trying to be practical, said, "Just move on, bro, don't drag it out." That was the loneliest part. Not just being betrayed by his wife, but watching the truth get dressed up, pouted, and sent out to introduce itself as his fault. After Shalom left, Joe moved into a small studio near Midtown because staying in that apartment felt like sleeping inside a lie. The place had thin walls, a stubborn AC unit, and a bathroom sink that coughed before it committed to running water. He slept on an air mattress that sighed every time he turned over, which was often because grief doesn't believe in bedtime. Some nights he ate cereal for dinner and sat on the floor because he had no couch. Other nights he drove around Houston until 2 a.m. just to avoid being alone with his thoughts. A man can survive heartbreak. The humiliation is what really starves him. Yet even in those ugly months, life kept slipping him little ridiculous moments, as if refusing to let sorrow become the whole story. One morning Joe got into a heated argument with a laundromat dryer that had stolen $3 and still left his jeans damp enough to irrigate a garden. Another day he tried online dating and matched with a woman whose profile picture was actually her and 3 friends, a guessing game disguised as romance. Reggie laughed so hard on the phone he nearly choked. Joe laughed too, surprised at the sound of it. Sometimes humor is just pain wearing gym shoes, trying to keep moving. Joe did not become one of those men who pretend betrayal made them fearless. It made him fragile first. He flinched at love songs. He stopped answering people quickly because every conversation felt exhausting. He replayed memories like security footage, trying to find the exact place his marriage had broken. He remembered Shalom asleep on his chest during thunderstorms, remembered her sneaking fries off his plate and denying it with a straight face, remembered the softness of her voice when nobody else was around. That was the trap. The same person who wounds you often leaves behind your favorite memories. Morning becomes tangled, stubborn, humiliatingly tender. One evening Joe sat in his car outside his studio and realized he could not keep surviving like a man waiting for somebody else's conscience to wake up. Shalom was not going to apologize. Her family was not going to tell the truth. The people who chose convenience over loyalty were not suddenly going to grow a spine. That realization hurt, but it also cut something loose. He found a therapist at a clinic on the south side and started going every Thursday after work. The first few sessions, he mostly sat there with his jaw tight, speaking in pieces. Then the pieces began turning into language, and language into clarity. Therapy did not magically fix Joe. It gave him better questions. Why had he confused being needed with being loved? Why did he work so hard to appear unbothered when he was bleeding internally? Why had he accepted scraps of tenderness as proof of devotion? Little by little, he saw that Shalom had not destroyed his worth. She had only exposed where he had placed it, in being useful, reliable, endlessly forgiving. His therapist told him healing was not becoming cold. It was learning not to hand the keys of your peace to people who enjoy crashing into your boundaries. Joe wrote that down and read it like scripture. Around the same time, Joe finally enrolled in a tech certification program he had postponed for 2 years because life, bills, and marriage always seemed more urgent. It was not glamorous. Most nights he studied at a small table with one wobbling leg, coffee gone cold beside him, while upstairs neighbors practiced what sounded like competitive furniture dragging. Still, he kept going. Networking basics, cloud systems, security principles. He felt rusty, then foolish, then determined. There was something healing about learning a world that made sense. Computers broke for reasons. Systems failed in ways you could trace. Unlike Betrayal, problems in tech could actually be solved by patience and skill. Shalom, meanwhile, never softened. She sent practical, chilly messages about paperwork, bills, and dividing possessions, as if she were returning a blender, not dismantling a marriage. Once, when Joe asked about a tax document she had, she replied, "Please don't make this harder than it already is." He stayed at the message in disbelief. There are people who can stab you and then complain about the blood on the floor. Through mutual acquaintances, Joe learned the man in Dallas had not gone anywhere. In fact, Shalom had folded him into her life almost immediately. That knowledge burned, but not the way it once would have. Pain was becoming instruction. Months passed, then a year. Joe got certified, then got an offer from a company in Atlanta for a system support role with better pay and actual room to grow. When he told almost nobody and packed his things quietly, it felt like protecting a flame from wind. Atlanta was not some movie ending. He was still healing when he crossed state lines with boxes in the trunk and fast food wrappers on the passenger seat. But the city gave him anonymity, and anonymity gave him room. A modest apartment in Decatur. Morning runs. New routines. Work that respected his mind. Peace arrived softly, not as fireworks but as the absence of dread. Joe's private transformation showed up in ordinary details. He stopped checking Shalom's social media. He bought real furniture one piece at a time instead of treating his home like a temporary shelter for sadness. He learned to cook salmon properly after years of turning it into pink punishment. He found a barber in Atlanta who lined him up so sharp Joe tipped like he had just witnessed a miracle. He started smiling at strangers again, not because he had forgotten what happened, but because the event no longer owned every hallway in his mind. Healing, he learned, looks less like triumph and more like getting your appetite back. Romance returned carefully, almost shy. It began when Joe met Naomi at a bookstore cafe near Little 5 Points. She was a black woman with intelligent eyes, a sarcastic mouth, and the habit of writing notes in the margins of books she actually owned, which Joe found reckless and charming. They started with conversation, not sparks. She laughed at his dry humor and challenged him when he hid behind it. On their third outing, Joe spilled jerk sauce on his shirt and tried to act dignified while Naomi laughed so hard she had to hold the table. Her laugh did not mock him. It made embarrassment feel survivable. Joe took things slowly with Naomi because he had learned that pace is not the enemy of passion. Sometimes it is the proof of seriousness. They walked the Beltline at sunset, shared peach cobbler from a place Naomi swore was spiritually an auntie's kitchen, and spent one rainy evening playing spades in her apartment while old-school soul music drifted through the room. Joe lost badly because Naomi played with the cold, strategic focus of a woman who probably would have conquered nations in another century. When he accused her of smiling like a card hustler, she leaned over and kissed him with such warmth it shut the joke right down. What made Naomi different was not perfection. It was honesty. She did not perform confusion when she meant no, and she did not withhold affection to gain leverage. She noticed when Joe went quiet and asked about it directly. The first time he told her the whole story about Shalom, he expected that familiar mix of pity and shallow outrage. Naomi gave him neither. She listened, asked thoughtful questions, and said, "What she did says everything about her character and nothing about your capacity to be loved." Joe had heard many supportive sentences over the year, but that one landed somewhere deep enough to rearrange the furniture. Then karma arrived the way real karma often does, not with dramatic music, just consequences finally catching up to arrogance. One Tuesday night, Joe saw an email from an old address he barely recognized. It was Shalom. The subject line read, "Can we talk?" He almost deleted it unread. Instead, he opened it and found a story soaked in panic. The Dallas man had moved in with her months earlier, charmed her, used her credit, borrowed money in her name, and vanished after clearing out their apartment. Furniture gone, savings gone, utility bills behind, her credit wrecked. The same recklessness she had mistaken for excitement had finally introduced itself as ruin. There was no remorse in Shalom's message, only self-pity wearing the clothes of reflection. She wrote that life had humbled her. She wrote that Joe of all people should understand her heart. She wrote that she had made mistakes, plural, the coward's way of avoiding naming the worst one singularly. Then she asked whether they could talk, maybe meet, maybe see whether there was any grace left between them. Joe read it twice, not because he was tempted, but because the old version of him would have rushed to rescue, to interpret suffering as transformation. The healed version noticed what was missing. She still had not actually apologized. Joe sat at his kitchen table in Decatur, the one he had assembled correctly on the first try because this was a different life, and let the moment settle. Outside, somebody's dog barked at nothing. Inside, the apartment smelled like garlic and butter from the pasta he had just cooked. Naomi had left 20 minutes earlier after stealing the last piece of bread and accusing Joe of under-seasoning his salad like a suburban uncle. Ordinary happiness filled the room. Joe realized that was the true reverse. Not that Shalom was hurting, not even that he was thriving. It was that her chaos no longer had a reserved seat in his spirit. He replied with 6 words, "I hope you find the help you need." No accusation, no reunion bait, no speech polished for dramatic effect. Then he archived the email and changed his filters so messages from her address skipped the inbox entirely. It took less than a minute. Joe did not shake afterward. He did not cry. He did not pace. He washed his dishes, texted Naomi a joke about her criminal abuse of bread privileges, and got ready for work the next morning. That was the private victory nobody claps for but everybody should respect, when a door that once led straight into your pain becomes just another wall in your house. Looking back, Joe understood that betrayal had not only broken his heart, it had exposed his hunger to be chosen at any cost. He had mistaken endurance for devotion and silence for strength. He had thought being a good man meant absorbing damage without complaint. It did not. A good man can love deeply and still leave when love is returned with contempt. He can grieve honestly and still rebuild. He can be romantic without being naive, kind without becoming available for abuse. The funniest part, in a dark way, was that Shalom had accused him of being too predictable. She was right about one thing. Joe kept choosing peace once he learned its value. The moral is not that karma always arrives quickly or that every wounded person gets a perfect new love story tied with a bow. Sometimes consequences come late. Sometimes closure is silent. Sometimes the only justice you get is a steadier heartbeat, a cleaner home, wiser boundaries, and the ability to hear your phone buzz without fear. But that is not small. That is life. Joe learned that the strongest comeback is rarely loud. It is private, disciplined, and deeply personal. It is becoming the kind of man who no longer confuses chaos with chemistry, and no longer chases anyone who could watch him bleed and call it his fault. Before you go, show a little love by liking this video and subscribing. Around here, the drama may be messy, but the lessons are real and the comeback is always worth watching.